This week, we review the population problem, apply it to genetic entropy, then apply it all to the creation-evolution debate, and show how you can know who the creator is in a new rant. This is Genesis Week. And welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, made possible by the supporters of CORE Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education, and now carried on the Christianema Network, christianema.com, Christian cinema at its finest. Excellence in power broadcasting! We took over my grandmother's basement for this week's broadcast, so we can continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to our creator while doing it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in wazooloo.com or genesisweek.com, and you will find us. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get extras like CrEvo rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. So I was raked over the coals again recently on Facebook for CrEvo rant number 71, the population problem. I once again had to remind myself to be patient, not get frustrated, because undoubtedly I am frustrating some of you viewers with what I say. I'll again try to be respectful, but at the same time I hope you don't mind my being blunt about the facts. I'll let you watch the rant on your own for fun, but I will recite a couple of points here for the discussion. I pointed out that the world's population fits spectacularly with observed population growth statistics and the biblical timeline. Now, if we start off with 4 couples who survived the near extinction of the entire human race at the time of Noah's flood, about 4,500 years ago, we'll arrive at our present 7 billion people with an average growth rate of about 0.46%. Now, typical growth rate in recent years has been 1.092%. So our needed figure is actually a little conservative. I was first criticized for using an exponential growth rate. Yeah. Technically, the math I used was a compound interest formula. What formula would you expect to use? The data, the scientific evidence, the facts show an exponential growth rate. Yes, there's variation on that line. So what? Wars, famine, and pestilence is already incorporated into that chart. The overall big picture clearly shows an exponential growth rate. So why then would certain people not use an exponential growth rate in their discussion? The only people who do not use an exponential growth rate are those trying to defend evolution and deep time. Dr. Anderson put it succinctly in last week's show. Evolution is used to calibrate the data. Evolution demands a fudge factor to make the data fit evolution. Watch what happens when you attempt to invoke deep time. This chart is straight off the Wikipedia page. Though the chart fits beautifully with the biblical timeline of the human population starting 6,000 years ago, evolution assumes people have been around for some 200,000 years. So just when you think the graph would hit 0, evolution and deep time demand the insertion of a number of unrealistic assumptions, like a near extinction human population with a growth rate of 0 for some 190,000 years. Now, this part of the chart is based on actual data. This part is either extrapolated from the data or a reasonable guess based on archaeology. And this part, forced by evolutionary theory and deep time, is based strictly upon the demands of deep time and evolution. Now, the skeptics, of course, claim there was an explosive population growth somewhere around 10,000 years ago or so with the advent of agriculture. The previous hunter-gatherer lifestyle would limit the population. It's also suggested an alleged beneficial mutation occurred that allowed the people to leave the sea as a primary source of food. Now, I cannot overemphasize how many assumptions, guesses, and wishes are packed into that short sentence. The timescale itself is calibrated by evolutionary assumptions and deep time. It's assumed that humans did not partake in agriculture from the beginning. There's a subtle assumption that our ancestors were stupider compared to us. It assumes there was no population growth for 190,000 years. Now, you are certainly welcome to assume all this, and you are certainly welcome to believe it, but please notice this is imaginary data, an absence of evidence. Using the same amount of land we use today with our modern growing and harvesting practices and harvesting equipment, the historic native Indians figured out ways to grow 3 times the amount of food we do. I go into some details of my response to TLD on YouTube. Suffice it to say, it is strictly an assumption that we did not always have agriculture, and an assumption that our ancestors did not know agriculture better than we do. It's also an assumption that is in direct contradiction to the biblical account of creation, where God put the first man and woman in a garden to till the garden and to keep it. Furthermore, the critics completely ignored the second significant point I made in the population problem rant. Where are all the graves? If we do use the unrealistic numbers provided by the skeptics, you still have an incredible number of graves of people. The evolutionary timescale dates some graves found at 130,000 years old. That's a long time ago. So, people were burying their dead along with artifacts, etc., for at least 130,000 of those 200,000 years. Extrapolating population numbers, we arrive at about 164 graves for every square kilometer of dry land on planet Earth. Dry land which includes the mountains, swamps, bedrock, and places where nobody would bury a body. So the concentration is, of course, much higher for the land available for burial. Now, even if you assume that all the bodies simply rotted away, you would still find artifacts and other evidence of graves. Again, the skeptics will attempt to explain all of this away, bringing us back to my main point again. You are arguing from an absence of evidence, not because of the evidence. May I suggest, it is not the graves that are missing, but rather the assumed deep time. I say all that to say this. In order to accommodate evolution in deep time, you must produce imaginary data, wild and unrealistic speculations, and argue using evidence that is absence. All the while, the biblical timeline requires no fudge factoring whatsoever, and in fact, just plain fits the evidence. The Bible fits the scientific evidence. Evolutionary theory and deep time does not. Interestingly, these assumptions of population stasis and explosion cropped up in a Nature paper this past week. I like the way David Coppage put it, the human genome is in meltdown. Many of you will recall CrEvo Rant number 78, the boat that don't float. The main point was that the human DNA is deteriorating, and fast. Geneticist Dr. Jonathan Sanford, co-inventor of the gene gun and a former evolutionist, now turned young Earth creationist, exhaustively documented this DNA deterioration in his book, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome. Basically, each generation is accumulating minor errors in their DNA, errors that are missed by the DNA repair systems, but don't cause catastrophic genetic failure, better known as death. The errors are passed on to the next generation, which accumulates its own errors, which passes the old and new errors on to the next generation, and so on. This continual collection of errors replaces the information in the DNA with noise. Eventually, there is no information left on how to build nor maintain a human body, and only genetic noise. And the human race dies. Evolution requires the gaining of information, but genetic loss is what is observed, and it is happening so fast that we could not have been around for hundreds of thousand years because we'd be extinct. A paper by geneticists from 4 different universities came out in the January 10th issue of Nature. They examined exomes. Exomes are a specific part of the DNA. They were looking specifically for errors that had occurred in the DNA, replacing one of the letters in the string with another letter. The letters are called nucleotides, and so changing one of the letters is called a single nucleotide variant, or SNV for short. So just remember that an SNV is a single letter changed in the DNA. Now, some of that DNA is used as a jig for building proteins, while some DNA is instructions. After examining over 15,000 genes in over 6,500 individuals from around the world, the researchers estimated that approximately 73% of all protein-coding SNVs and approximately 86% of SNVs predicted to be deleterious arose in the past 5,000 to 10,000 years. In other words, some 73 to 86% of the errors in the human DNA have occurred in the past 5 to 10,000 years. On an evolutionary timescale, 5 to 10,000 years ago is yesterday. Notice the unmentioned assumptions that we discussed with regards to population and time. The researchers assumed the dramatic increase in DNA errors was caused by a population explosion in the last 5 to 10,000 years. This Nature paper dramatically confirms again what Dr. Sanford has been saying. Our DNA is deteriorating, and quickly. If all these errors occurred in the last 10,000 years, how then do you expect the human race to evolve? Adding 190,000 years to the picture doesn't produce human evolution. It only multiplies the accumulated errors by 190-fold and produces human extinction. This is a very loud genetic alarm clock. This program is sponsored in part by Genesis Park, found at www.genesispark.com, where we say dinosaurs are living evidence of a powerful creator. And by Canada's first permanent creation museum in the heart of Alberta's dinosaur beds, the Big Valley Creation Science Museum, bbcsm.com. And by you, our financial supporters.
What does the Bible say about aliens? Is there life on other planets? What can science tell us about the possibility of aliens? Ian Juby gives answers to these and many more questions in this fascinating and highly disturbing subject. Looking analytically at the subject, complete with the testimonies of people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. The answers will probably surprise you. In this 1.5-hour lecture, Ian shows that the alleged aliens are a problem and that Jesus is the solution. Order online today at Ian's bookstore.
Mail for me? I got a letter from Raymond in California. Ian Creation Ministries International shows this in their brochure, Can You Tell the Difference Between Evolution and Natural Selection? They say selective breeding can also be reversed. For example, if we bred a Jack Russell and a Labrador together, we would get a dog that has lots more variety in its genes. Isn't that adding new genetic information? Excellent question, Raymond. Thanks for writing in. The brochure in question was talking about dog breeds, much like I did in episode 14, Ring Around the Species. You know, where incredible effort was made to evolve the world's most useless dog, the Chihuahua. By selectively breeding, we remove more and more information. We remove variation in the dogs. For example, the Chihuahua would only have genes for short hair. So what CMI is suggesting is that this alleged evolution, as some would call it, can even be reversed. If you now breed a Chihuahua with another dog that has long hair, then the offspring could have long hair. Is that new information? No, it isn't. Because the dog with long hair had the genes for long hair, and thus provided those genes for the offspring. It was information that already existed. Okay, we gotta scoot. Thank you for watching, and please tune in again next week. I'm your host, Ian Juby. You can send in your questions and comments to us in a number of ways, and don't forget, if you're catching us by YouTube, you can use the convenient share button down below the video to share it with your friends on TwitFace+. Remember those words of our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me." We'll see you next week.
We need your support to help keep this program on the air. You can help by making a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K2P4. You can also sign up for Ian's newsletter, detailing current research and news items at ianjuby.org.